So do you want to kick off and just tell us what your podcast is about and what's driven you to actually create that podcast?
Yeah, so the BTS Creative Academy Podcast, I explore the lives of creative people. I try my best to find out what it is they're doing, which actually that's the easy part. The harder part is try and discover the why behind what they're doing. Why do they pursue their art, their craft? And we sit down, we have a conversation. Sometimes we get the answers, sometimes we don't. But it's always an exciting journey to go on.
Within that, what has been some of the lessons that you've learned by talking to these people? Have you discovered stuff that you've been able to use to inspire your own journey?
Oh, very much so. So I at the beginning of this, I had this assumption that I was the teacher and had something to give and offer. But I quickly learned that I'm the student. And every single person that I sit down with has something to offer, has something unique to give, and I was really quite shocked actually at how versatile and wide the opinions and teachings can be from different people. And every single person that I've spoken to, I would say, has given me something.
In your life, your journey, you've been creative from when you were a child. I mean, have you always seen yourself as a kind of creative being and use that to kind of sculpt your journey?
Yes, very, very much so. So when I was young, I always had a very vivid imagination. I was always storytelling in my mind. Didn't kind of know how to channel it, how to channel that creativity. When I was young, I had some idea that I was going to be an astronaut or a pilot. And I went to Air Cadets, and I realised when I was at Air Cadets, I was kind of doing that for fancy dress. I enjoyed the dressing up more than the actual, the subject of it. And through some kind of fluke, I found myself at a theatre when I was 16. For a friend encouraging me to get involved with a youth group there, and I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to go. I was like, no, that's definitely not for me. I'm not outgoing and loud, and I don't want to perform. But he told me that in the group he was the only other boy, and that there was about 30 girls in this group, and that none of these girls knew him. And they wouldn't know me, and we'd have a fresh. I'm 16 at this point, so we'd have a fresh opportunity with all these girls, and that sounded very, very interesting to me to go along to that.
Some journeys have started that way, haven't they, Martin?
I think so.
Where were you in the Air Cadets? Where are you from, Martin?
So I'm based in Essex, just outside of London. The Air Cadets, it was the Harlow squadron that I was part of, and I did get a lot from being in the Air Cadets. So I got a lot of self-confidence, and I started to learn some discipline there that may have been a different kind of teaching at school. Learned a lot about teamwork. So stuff that it wasn't all a wasted journey. Stuff that I've taken from that and used in my creative life. Actually, I've received some film roles from having that experience as being in the Air Cadets.
Oh no, because I was in the Air Cadets for a short while too. I ended up in the Marine Cadets, and that's another story. It's not a podcast about me, mine. But no, I love aircraft. I've always loved aircraft since I was a kid. I just think that the 20th century aircraft, just one of the aircraft, the camera. A few things really symbolise the 20th century, and aircraft are just beautiful. I'd love to have a little F-35 jet just to fly around my island. I mean,
just to roam around,
go to the supermarket. Yeah, I mean, they look beautiful, wouldn't they? My back garden.
That'd be lovely. Yeah, I think once the podcast has made it big and I've made my millions, I'll buy myself a runway and a plane. Why not? Like John Travolta.
Martin, okay, I think we should keep contact.
I think
Yes.
this is an interesting thing as well. Like creativity can actually help us envisage what we want in the future. So we got this crazy idea that I want to fly an aeroplane around an island. And some people will make that a reality. Elon Musk goes and shoots a car into space. That took a bit of creativity, and he's a slightly interesting guy. But
Yeah.
but again, the air cadets and creativity seem almost unlikely bedfellows in that you've got, like you say, the discipline within the air cadets. However, you were also exploring your creativity alongside that kind of discipline. So they seem unlikely to go together, but also quite helpful in some respects, because I think a lot of people get lost in creativity. I mean, you've got infinite possibilities, and it can become quite a burden in some respects that you're not, exploring them all at the same time. Whereas actually, if you mix a little bit of discipline with creativity, maybe that does help. So I don't know. Have you any thoughts on that?
Oh, definitely. And I've had guests on my podcast, mainly in the early days, that didn't consider themselves as a creative. I had some friends that just simply wanted to help me out, get this thing going. And a close friend of mine, he is a business development manager, and he works for big companies for a short period of time to turn things around. If he worked for KFC, for example, and they weren't selling enough chips, and so he had to come in for 3 months and figure out a strategy for more chips to be sold. And he didn't consider himself a creative at all. We sat down on the podcast and we broke down how he needs his imagination to figure out these solutions. It isn't all just skill-based. It isn't all just based on his teachings and his learnings. He needs to use his mind to go to a place that doesn't yet exist to drive us forward.
I think that's the thing. I mean, creativity is part of a problem-solving process. So whether you're using it in the arts, or whether you're using it in your daily life, or even your relationships with partners, children, etc., we need to think outside the box on occasions. So again, this is kind of why I like the idea of this podcast. It's exploring creativity in a way that it encourages people to reflect and to grow in some respects. And I think, we can do that. We can do it by listening to music. We watch films, we watch all sorts of things. But I think it's becoming a bit of a problem in that we are consuming a lot of very low grade materials. And I like the idea of improving our mental diet, which I think podcasts are a really important part of. I know when I switched to listening to podcasts several years ago, I found a great amount of inspiration within them, and hearing those conversations, and then running rooms on Clubhouse, engaging in those high level kind of discussions, I found very helpful. And it challenges you to ask deeper questions within yourself. So
yes, amazing the answers we can find. Well, I mean, if we're useful with the internet, it's a wonderful thing. The last few days, I've been talking of Essex. I've actually been looking at an old Big Breakfast show from the last Big Breakfast from 2001. That's very Essex, isn't it? Yeah, with
I think
Johnny
was that
Vaughan.
Chelmsford? I think was that Chelmsford they filmed that.
Oh, I didn't know it was Chelmsford, but yeah, I know that.
Well, I might be wrong. I might be completely wrong. I might be making that up.
Yeah. It's actually been making me miss home a little bit. It's funny that it's actually the Big Breakfast from 2001 that's been making me miss home more than anything else at the moment.
Is that when you were last in the UK?
I mean?
Was that the last time you was in the UK?
Oh no, the last time I go every year for work, so I've been doing a little job for the NHS every year. So I get back. I got family. I got a daughter and family, so I need to come home. But I mean, it's just when you start thinking about who are my people, who are they, and it's when I watch the Big Breakfast that I start thinking about those are my people. It's a great show. I mean, I miss those days. It was before everyone went mad, isn't it, Martin?
Before we got
talking of creativity.
I was going to
Sorry,
say,
no,
I
carry on.
think back in those early 2000s, that was a point where there was a bit more freedom and less judgment when you spoke, when you had a thought or an idea. If you look back to The Big Breakfast, some of the comedy was on the nail, some of the comedy was quite dry. But now I feel we're living in a moment where there's a lot of judgment when people speak. And I think that that's quite a dangerous place for us to go to. And I'm trying my best to be as open and as honest with my thoughts and my speech as possible, because I believe that gives me a lot of power.
Well, it's almost at that period. 2001 was the last episode with Johnny Vaughan and Denise Van Outen. And that was almost the time to step out of the building, because that's when it started, really, wasn't it? People then started to be very particular about what you could. I mean, there's no way. I mean, Denise. I mean, the things that she used to do. I mean, it was just it's so funny. You wouldn't be allowed to do that now. I mean, she'd be called misogynist if she did what she was doing on the Big Breakfast. And so it was a dangerous time. So it is. I mean, creativity is being dampened a little bit. It's almost like everybody opened up and says we can all be free, and then suddenly people said no, it's not useful that you do that. So we've got to be a lot more careful. So one reason why I'm on my little island in the middle of the Atlantic.
I think I was going to say, I think that the freedom of speech thing is we're at a quite a important moment with that, with our freedom of expression, that there is a force going on somewhere within the media that I believe is trying to keep us all in a certain place. Is it trying to control our thoughts and minds? I believe that we are potentially moving to an Orwellian kind of society where there is. I've reached out to a few people who would be wonderful guests on my podcast, but they're so frightened to speak up because they fear of how it would damage their career. And it's not that they'll say anything wrong. It's not that they'll say anything offensive. They're just so scared of how that will be held against them in the future. And we shouldn't feel like that. We should have this moment of saying what we think. And if it's wrong, exploring that. Let's break that up. But let's not hold people to account based upon their thoughts and opinions at one time.
And as you say,
unless it is extremely offensive or extremely racist, or there's extremes to these things. But at the moment, there seems to be a delicacy that people are trying to navigate.
But again, when you've got extremes being expressed, then you have also got a right to reply. And with freedom of speech, it guarantees that right. And so rather than things being hidden and not talked about, we can openly discuss them. I mean, I think, with the Trump administration getting in, they're talking of banning 1984 Animal Farm on the banned book list in America. And that is a scary time. And we still live with, over here, I believe, a great degree of freedom of speech and thought as a result. Because I think if you limit freedom of speech, people start to think in much more constrained terms as well. And that is definitely not a world that I particularly want to live in. So, by doing podcasts, by making music, by making films, those are our creative outlets that enable people to hopefully be reassured and inspired that we can still have that freedom of thought. So with regard to your projects at the moment, what are your driving values? Is it to keep that freedom of speech going? Is it to keep people exploring? Have you got a kind of driving force that's moving you on at the moment?
I guess there's a lot of elements like that are underlying under the surface. But I think a driving force for me is I'd like to see the creative landscape change a bit. I was an actor for a long time in a solitary pursuit. I found myself quite lonely at times and doing a lot of stuff myself, and found the whole creative industry to be one of individuals. And I would like to see it come back to a place of community where we're raising each other up, where we're helping each other out, where it's a place where we want to be part of it, and others want to be part of it, and it's not this solitary thing. For me, it's about building a community.
Yeah, I love that. I talk a lot about community, Martin. I think it's the most important thing there.
Mm.
And this is it. I mean, we are divided by our roles in society just naturally. But I think, you do tend to get some people who become actors, and that is what they do. That is their speciality. Mm-hmm. And again, whether that creates separation, because actually, if you go back to kind of Da Vinci, he was like the Renaissance man. He wanted to be a physical person, an intellectual person. We should be rounded individuals. Do you feel perhaps some actors miss that kind of, balance in life? If you go to specialize and be a professional actor, can that have its kind of mental health consequences, like you say, isolation and self-doubt and stuff?
Definitely. I've seen it a lot. It's you're in a position where you have to regularly compete. Auditions are a competition. And so you get into this mindset that it's all about me. What can I do? What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And the thing is, when you get into the game, when you get into a piece of theatre or you get a role in a film, if you're still in that mindset, it damages the piece. So you've got a lot of work to do on yourself, that you can handle the competition, but yet come together to create something. And I think a lot of actors are struggling with that element of, how do we come together again? How do we compete and show our best selves, but work as a team?
So again, creatively finding solutions to bring back that balance within your life is an important part of any individual, whether you work in an Amazon warehouse or whether you're an actor. Mm-hmm. It's creating that balance between one of the books that I've really enjoyed recently is The Chimp Paradox, and it talks about the kind of human brain and the chimp brain. And funny enough, looking at it this morning, they were saying like the chimp brain is more kind of akin to the fun side, the creative side, whereas the human brain is very logical and very, kind of set on what you're going to achieve. And again, just creating mm-hmm. that balance between creativity and self-discipline and, balance within oneself. But again, maybe we can use creativity to creatively create that balance, to actually, films, and I think one of the things, I listen to a lot of music on the radio, and it's going downhill. It feels it's becoming very empty and vacuous. And, for films and music to have content that inspires us, we can have films for escapism. Creativity serves many different roles. I think, we can have it for mm-hmm. escapism or for provocation, reflection. And again, choosing what we consume seems quite important. Have you got anything particular, either of you two, that is particularly inspiring you at the moment? And Dom, you talked about The Big Breakfast. And actually, when you sent me that clip, it took me back 20 years. And it actually did make me think things have changed a lot in this world. And actually what mm-hmm. my kids experienced growing up through TV, TikTok, Facebook, and the media is very different from what we had. And,
that clip was good because it shows the adverts as well. It's a whole lot. It's the news, what's going on. It was talking about uranium depleted bombs being tested off the coast of Scotland. I was thinking, my God, that was 2001. What's going on?
Mm.
But it was like going back into some previous history. I do these sort of walking tours around the town of my island, and there's one cafe we go past, and I joke that in this cafe they still sell these things called books and magazines. So we all spend a moment where we talk about, and then I talk about how I've actually been in there and I've actually seen nobody looking at a mobile phone. I've seen these people reading these old things, and I was thinking, I do actually feel like they're from a different millennium. They are way back in time. When I go in there, I do feel like I'm in some kind of TARDIS, and we've gone back to another time, because things move so quickly. And
I think things
that's why I'll be very lucky to go to different places and see their different perceptions because of the different realities they're in. I mean, I heard recently there's a country in the world, I don't know what the country is, but I've heard there's a country that still doesn't have a cinema in the entire country.
Wow.
I don't know whether that's a good or bad thing. I mean, if we talk about guarding against propaganda, maybe that's one way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it shows the difference in structure of certain places and history.
I was going to say, I feel like we're having a resurgence on some materials as well. So you were saying there about the books. I'm noticing a lot more people are picking up physical books again rather than reading a Kindle or their iPhone. And there's a bit of a resurgence as well on things like CDs over Spotify and Apple Music. My daughter recently has just bought herself an LP, a record player, because she wants that physical music again. Well, she's never experienced. What am I saying again? My daughter at 16, she's never experienced physical music. She recently picked a CD up a couple of years ago from the glove box in the car and said, "What's this? A CD?" At 16 years old. I
wonder what singing a song or having a little, bunch of people around a piano in the drawing room, just playing for afternoons. I mean, I know families that do that. In fact, it's often posh families who do things like that. They play games together after dinner and sit down and listen to real music. They make a positive effort to keep one foot in the past. Have you got one daughter, mine?
I've got a daughter. She's 16, and I've got a son at 19 as well. So they're at that age where they're just starting to reach out and explore the world for themselves, which is an interesting time.
It's exciting. Yeah, we got to make sure that we're tuned in as well to help them out in that point, or at times to scare them silly. I mean, I think my daughter, I think I went too far sometimes in trying to prepare my daughter for the world. Sometimes she's rebelling against that more than anything else.
Well, yeah, that's human nature.
Have both your kids followed a kind of creative journey, or are they kind of very different in their sort of outlook to you?
Mm-hmm. So, in fact, this goes back to me starting the podcast, is that one of the big things with wanting to recognise the importance of creativity in life was seeing the effect that it had on my daughter. My daughter, after and during COVID, she struggled a lot with the separation of school. During COVID, her mum was very ill with cancer. And so my daughter, my son, myself, we spent a good 18 months, 2 years pretty much indoors to protect their mum. And we didn't venture out. We stayed away from the world because of the fears. And that was a very important time for my daughter and my son's development, where they were away from everything. And prior to that, creativity was a little part of their lives, but I've seen how important creativity has been for both my children coming out of that and reconnecting with the world. For example, my daughter leads a band. She's the lead singer in a band, and she plays the guitar, she plays saxophone, she plays the drums. None of this was happening prior to COVID. But since then and now, she has a life in music, and she just won 2 local Battle of the Bands where she competed against other schools, and she wants that for her life, which I'm looking at that like wonderful. Like she's always going to have music now. She's always going to be able to connect with people through music, and that was something that I was concerned about coming out of COVID with my kids. I was just going to say, my son, he's moving into media studies now. He's very good at maths and science, and the school was kind of pushing him along that maths and science road because he was naturally gifted at it, but he didn't really have an interest in it. It may have been what he could do easily to get the exam results, but he didn't have an interest. Whereas recently he started doing media studies, and he's found an interest in the behind the scenes stuff. And it's just, the creativity has just sparked something in them. It's like it's lit a fuse, and where that will go, I'm nothing but excited about.
I think one of the things that I noticed, I mean, Ken Robinson, he talks about how the arts are being downgraded within schools and education, and that basically they're dying out. When you're farming people, that actually having creative people doesn't necessarily, create the same revenue return as having people who will focus on one task solely.
So I've got a bit of a beef with Ken Robinson because he talks a lot of what he talks about is basically Steiner education. He talks about kids should be taught how to dance. It's Steiner education, and it's like he's rebeefing or projecting the whole notion of Steiner schools, but he never mentions them. I mean, he could. It's almost it's one of the issues that we have in British universities and things where people tend to think that to be successful, you have to somehow prove that you have made these studies instead of actually respecting the fact that people have done it in the past. So Ken Robinson is almost like rebranding this stuff instead of actually saying, look, it's all around you. Just start funding Steiner schools and you'll have dancing kids who are taught about communities. That's because my daughter went in the Steiner school from kindergarten all the way to 16, and then she hopped out and went into an Indian school. So she has a really balanced idea of community. She's a happy architect now, and combining. We talked about combining creativity with just experiencing the other side, because going up to 16 years in a Steiner school, you become almost too creative. You're not plugged into what's happening in the real world. So it's like to plug herself in. She went to Oxford Brookes and studied to be an architect. But it's a shame that a wonderful bastion of education doesn't mention the fact that there is that Steiner education there. But we'll move on from there.
He's not able to now because he's passed away. But
oh, is he? Is he?
Yeah, he's no more. So he can't rectify that. But generally, his message seemed good in wherever it came from.
But whatever planet he's on right now, wherever he's surfing.
I think the interesting part, wherever the ideas come from, is that I think education can kind of push you down one route or the other. And rather than going for that kind of mix in between that creates quite healthy, balanced individuals. I mean, like you say, your daughter, she went to Steiner school and then studied to become an architect, so she gets both, to have that creativity and those real world skills as well, and to be able to combine them.
I think it was idealism and materialism. I think we've been moved away from we all think of things like the left and rightism and stuff like that now, which I think has led us down this weird alleyway, because it is idealism. Idealistic people tend to think of higher powers. They're the ones who build the social healthcare systems, the hospitals help others. And then we move to materialism. We tend to be very self-focused, and materialism can be useful because it helps you do your accounts. We've just got to make sure that it doesn't run our lives, which is what's happening. And I think we've been led down a bit of an odd path, which is something I do. I mentioned that I do walking tours here, and that's one thing we talk about is how the island I live on went from being an idealistic island. It was built on religious faith, and then how it moved to materialism. And I think that's really what's happened in our society. Is we're moving from idealism to materialism. Too much materialism is definitely not very healthy.
Well, going back to the schools, I think that the schools are kind of teaching kids that you have to know a career path with your chosen thing. So if you're a dancer or a singer at school, everything's being forced of that's the thing that you have to do for the rest of your life. Whereas it's not. You can be a dancer and a singer when you're younger, and that can give you skill sets for being a business development manager or something completely different. Like with your daughter, where she's now an architect. It doesn't have to be the thing, but schools are forcing all these children to believe that if they don't pass the exams in their chosen subjects right now, they haven't got a path.
Yeah,
and it kind of comes to an end.
That was done on purpose. That was when we moved from education used to be more idealistic. Often it was handled by the religious groups, the monasteries and convents, and then it moved. It's actually called the Prussian model. It's like the Prussian model of education is that you teach people about facts, and you make sure that they do exams regularly to make sure that they understand the facts that you've taught them, and you can actually just spurt them out. So it stops being about creativity. I mean, education used to be a creative thing about embedded in society, community. and now it's making sure that people understand the facts. And then there are certain people who have control of the facts. As long as you're in control of the facts, you can, and everyone believes in facts, you can control anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And,
so does this all come down to power then? Is this all a power grab then, the way the system is currently set up? To drive us away, pull us away from creativity, to have control over the masses? Is that what it is? Is there a fear from those in power that if we're all too creative, that we might do stuff for ourselves and live fulfilling lives? It's I often wonder, what is their end goal?
Well, just in a very brief way, because I think we'll go down an odd path. I think that there are certain people who believe that the only way that we're going to evolve. So I think there are certain people who actually think that there's an evolution going on. I mean, look at 2001: The Space Odyssey, where in the beginning you have the spaceship is taken over by a computer that basically takes over. And the last bit of the movie actually is more important than the book, because you have the fetus floating past planet Earth, and the last thing the fetus then thinks, "What shall I do next?" It's almost like the evolution has taken place. In the beginning of the film, you have the monolith, and that's when apes evolved to have the more modern thought, and then you have the next period of evolution. So I think there are people who believe that we're going through that phase. I think that those people also believe that there are certain things that we have to do to step through that, even though it's very painful at times. And so that's a bit more how they think. I don't think they're necessarily thinking, I want control, or I want to sit there and look like I'm standing on a plinth, like I'm in a book by Huxley or something like that. I think that they're people who truly believe that they're helping us to evolve, and they don't mind if a few people die. Just as in the past, people have died for evolution. And again, there are certain reasons why perhaps it's less important for them for that, because when it comes to religious purposes, somehow the life of a Palestinian isn't as important as the end goal, which is human evolution. So but it's definitely a funnel that we could go into, but it will move us away from talking about you, Martin.
But I guess that talking about me, that's the being a guest on your podcast. This is what I find quite different, actually, because I've always considered from the start of this podcast that this isn't about me. This is the thing that I find with a lot of podcasts that turn me off, is often the host will make it about them. On this journey, everyone that I speak to, yes, there's an element of me in there. There's an element of my experiences to be able to connect with people, but nowhere in the podcast is it ever about me. It's always them and the subject that we're talking about.
Yeah. It's nice. I do like that, and it feels like a lovely conversation we're having. I feel like we're in a Chelmsford pub having a beer together. But
and that's what's sometimes nice for the audience, to be that fly on the wall, that to be that observer of the conversation, and they can have those thoughts whether they agree or disagree with us, or maybe within here somewhere within this Chelmsford pub there's a 10-second nugget of genius. Who knows?
Yes. Yeah, that's where we're heading. Talking about the nugget of genius. Well, what is it that you do for keeping mind, body, and soul together and health? So one thing that Clive and me have been doing recently is just cutting out boozing. I haven't stopped drinking. It's just something I don't do very much of anymore. Just one thing I experimented with recently is fasting. I tried for 4 weeks actually not eating for half the week, and one of the reasons I did that was because a friend of mine said that a friend of hers had a miraculous recovery from cancer, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, but he had that recovery because he spent a week not eating, and then after that he had this miraculous recovery, and I was thinking, well, what is it that fasting, and I suppose ultimately is stepping away from our desires, is another way of thinking about it. Sure, I like to just drink 20 pints in a night, but actually it's probably not that useful for me. or actually it can be useful for me to give my body a rest to not eat all the time. But yeah, what are your thoughts about that, Martin?
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing process of discovery for me. I found that there's some things that are beneficial to my life for looking after myself. I think one of the things for me is finding a structure, because when you're self-employed, the days can get away from you, and so. And I think the way that my mind works as well, my mind is always coming up with new and interesting ideas, and I could easily run away with something that isn't beneficial to me. So having something there as a structure, as a guide to how my week, my month will work, or even if I've got a whiteboard where I've got a 5-year plan. So I've got a roadmap of where I would like to go. It might not be exactly that plan, and my structure might not work exactly. But I find having something there as a guide is hugely beneficial to my life and on a whole, and my relationships around me.
Well, this could be a good time to share some of those things. I mean, where are you going in 5 years' time, Martin?
Oh, 5 years' time. Should I share? Would you like to see the whiteboard? Should we be? I don't think I've shared this. I don't think I've shared this with anyone. Actually, this is quite private, and I'm really being open here. So this might look like an absolute mess, but we've got the mountain, and so we did year one. Okay, so year one down here. The year one was the foundation level with the podcast, because very much the first year of the podcast was a restart on life for me, a refresh. I think, Clive, we talked a little bit about that on the phone, and we might come back to that refresh. But I had a moment where I awoke, and so on that moment, for me, it was the foundation year. This was starting again. I started to consider everything I'm doing like I'm building a house. And I knew I had to get the foundation right. I knew I had to put in the work. I had to get in the dirt. I had to lay down the mud and the sand, and I had to mix it up and just start with something. And I feel like I achieved that. I feel like I achieved the foundation. I feel like that's there now. So I'm now into year two, which I'll take you back to my chart on the board here. It's a little mountain, year two, and it's got stability in there. Because again, going back to that idea of I'm building something here, it has to be stable at the bottom. So I do need an income as part of that stability. I do need that to be there. I need to look after myself, as we was talking about. I need to network. There are places that I'd like to go to. But at the moment, this year is stability led and focused, so all my plans, that is a key drive, is how is this going to contribute to my stability right now? And then we can even go to 5 years from now. The 5 year is quite simple. I quite like the idea of this. It looks like quite a nice image to go towards. The number one trusted talk show host. So in the background of all the things that I'm doing, I bear that in mind, that I'm moving towards someone that people consider trustworthy, that they consider themselves as guests on my podcast or future talk show, that they can talk to me and open up, that they can bring them their best selves, that they can share, and that we can do things together.
The first thing that popped in my mind when you said the most trusted podcast, I looked at your name and I thought, if you were Martin Colton. Martin Colton sounds like this kind of person you'd invite around to, just have a few beers and look after your kids, and you'd go off and have an evening and
Martin Colton. That's interesting. Yeah, I'm open to exploring that. No one's ever called me Marty, but maybe that's the.
I love the fact that you've got it all drawn out, because I think that's the thing. Sometimes we have these ideas and they kind of float around our heads, and actually once you get them out on a vision board or something, which is something that I'm notoriously bad at doing. I tend to just keep everything inside my head. And it can be a little bit like a whirlpool in there, and things get lost on a regular basis. But it's almost like if I write them down, it kind of cuts off other possibilities as well. But again, that is what helps you achieve the discipline to get to what you've put down, because you're not. So again, we're back to, for me, it's the balance of, having the dreams and the way to get there. But again, if you've got it written down, it can enable you to creatively problem solve all the things that are stopping you getting there, I think. And having that image, we do create our futures. And, by starting a podcast, by being a podcast guest, by creating a website, by going and talking to the right people and creating connections, and moving back to what Dom was saying, community, and creating those communities around us. So I think one of the conversations we had on the phone is that one of the benefits you felt of your podcast is that you were building up really positive networks around you. So, with regard to those networks, do you find yourself coming back and building relationships with people that you've created podcasts with?
Oh, definitely. I would say that every single person, and I've done about 300 of these conversations now, I would consider, it might sound crazy, but I'd consider them a friend. I would say we've built up a good, strong relationship. Some of us, we now text each other. I get invited to a local person who was a friend of a friend, runs a dance school. I don't really know them that well, but when kind of know people that are just outside of your circle. Invited. They're a couple. Invited them both onto the podcast, and they run a dance school. But they now invite me to their dance shows and the things that they're doing, and they want me to be involved and part of it. And it's so nice to have these connections, and it's really given me a fulfilling life having these well-rounded relationships that have come from the podcast. And like I say, it might sound crazy, but I consider every guest that's been on the podcast as a friend.
It sounds a very, very healthy kind of business to be in, and, I think, I've got a particular interest in kind of mental health and, having worked with kids and stuff in residential care, and this separation when we're not feeling part of a community. And I know, Dom, like you say, that's something you put a lot of emphasis on, is actually getting out into the real world and connecting with people. And whilst we're doing this over digital format, then it can leak out into real world stuff. And again, what you do, what you choose to do creates the next step along the way. And I think a lot of people are sat there consuming. They consume. And I think, if you give back and you share out, it can be very good for your mental health. And that can be done in many, many different ways. By running a podcast or being a guest. I mean, when we were running the Clubhouse room, I found that people coming on stage and talking got a lot from sharing, and they were people who wouldn't initially have talked on stage. And I think that can be very helpful. So moving forward, you've got your 5-year plan, and that's looking very exciting. Are you finding that you are making steady progression towards that and enjoying the journey along the way?
Oh yes, very much so. I feel that there are things that happen that are not always through actions that I've made directly, but there are little moments that happen. There are connections that I'm making that I go, oh, this is a stepping stone to the next thing. And I never expected this to happen like this today. But I think in some ways it's inevitable that if there's something that you want, the more that you connect with people, it's going to move you towards it, because there's like this exponential growth of movement that's happening, that it's, like I say, it's almost inevitable that you meet and connect with 300 plus people. It's going to take you somewhere, and you don't know where that's going to be,
Yeah.
But if you've got your own ideas of where you'd like it to be, and you connect with their ideas of where they're at, it's going to be a journey. And that's what I'm
The
seeing.
ability to present your story as well. I think that's important. As long as if people get it, then they'll support you in it. I think it's amazing how people people often do what they're asked to do. Really, I mean, people are normally very willing to help.
Mm.
You know, can you just help me with this bag? They'll pick it up and carry it. You know, if you show that you don't want them to do something, which a lot of people do. I mean, it's amazing how much language we got that comes from us that actually stops us from going where we want to go. It's
But this is, I mean, a lot of the times fear stops people from reaching out, for asking for help, for asking, like for opportunity. And actually, if you ask 100 people whether they're going to appear on a podcast that you're running, actually probably 5 of them will say yes. But if you don't ask anyone because you're afraid to, then no one says yes. And you create your reality through that. So, I mean, it sounds like you are quite confident in taking those steps, but it's obviously, once you make a successful step, it makes it easier to go to the next step. And I think a lot of people are stuck. From dealing with people throughout my life, I see a lot of people who seem to go around in circles, and they see life a certain way, and they see their own they're kind of caught by their own limitations. And I think it's just interesting whether there is a way of engaging in materials and life in a way that actually lifts some of those limitations from people, because it's very sad to live an unfulfilled life is definitely shouldn't be high on anyone's agenda. And I think, if we're asking what do we want from life, we want to be happy, content, but we also want to be growing and changing, presumably. But a lot of people seem to stagnate.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not confident all the time. I'm not. I know where I want to go, and I know what I want to do, but I have moments where I lack confidence in myself. I'm not always 100% sure where that comes from. But I think what helps me is having a vision, something that I can come back to. That when I have these moments of lacking confidence, that I can go, it's okay, because I can try again and continue on the journey, rather than getting caught up in that lack of confidence and just saying I can't do it because it's not naturally me. For example, I went to a film festival last night, and at the film festival I was invited there, and there was no expectation from the film festival inviting me along. But at the end, I wanted to connect with people. But where I didn't know anyone there, everyone had already got into their groups of their friends that they already know. And so I'm kind of standing around at the bar looking at everyone in their little groups. And I'm having this moment of, I'd like to connect with you, but I don't know how to break into the group, because that's not necessarily, doesn't feel like me as that person that just barges in. Hello, I'm Martin. I do a podcast. It doesn't feel right. And so, yeah, actually last night I had a moment of lacking confidence that I didn't progress things forward. And I could come away from that very disappointed in myself and very upset. But instead, I'm trying to take the mindset of, it's okay, I had a little stumble, but we live in a world where I can actually reach out to those people afterwards. I can look these people up on Instagram and Facebook, and I can email them and reach out and say, I've seen your film. We didn't get a chance to connect. Let's still do it. So I had a stumble, but I can pick myself up because I know where I'm going.
And actually that might be a more successful approach, because it's very easy to respond in the moment, but to actually take the effort to go back afterwards can be a lot more impactful potentially. So again, seeing the opportunities in the choices that we make maybe is quite a valuable lesson to take from that. So
there's one of those little Facebook posts that came up earlier. It was quite relevant. It was about the Japanese saying that if you get off at the wrong stop, make sure that it's not too far down the line, because otherwise it's a lot more expensive to get back.
I think that could be a great place to round this up, because we're reaching up to the 50-minute mark. But I would love to have you back as a guest at another point and see how things are progressing.
That'd be wonderful, yes. And how about you both be a guest on my podcast?
I would love that. Yeah, that would be great. It'd be nice to swap ideas around.
Yeah, it'd be a lovely thing to do, Martin.
And so going back to just to promote your podcast is the BTS Creative Academy Podcast. So people can find that on Spotify.
Yes, it's I've put it on all platforms: Spotify, Apple, Amazon. If you've got a podcast platform, it's there. You'll find it. YouTube as well, and all the social media platforms.
Excellent. And to sum up, what will people find on that podcast? What will inspire them from there?
Well, hopefully you'll find some ideas. You'll find some interesting stories where people share their journeys. You might find something that you connect with as well. That's my hope, that you'll find some ideas, inspiration maybe. Inspiration would be very nice. That would be very nice if someone was inspired by someone else's story and journey. But I think where I have real guests, real people, I think the connection will come through.
Yeah.
And just to put you on the spot for the end of the show, I'd like to ask each guest that joins us just a book, a song, and a film that has inspired you or has connected with you either throughout your life or recently. It could be anyone, but it'd just be interesting to know what's inspired you recently to share with the listeners.
Well, I'm actually reading a book at the moment called Big Magic, which is on topic. It's on creativity. It's written by Elizabeth, I'm going to say Gilbert, but that may be wrong. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love, which is quite a famous bestseller. But Big Magic explores creativity, and it explores the wonder and mystery behind creativity and potentially magic. And it's quite a good eye opener if you're questioning whether you're a creative or not.
Okay. What would you go for a song? Are you a music person? You take a lot from music?
Oh, very much so. I'd say that a big impactful song for me is Billy Joel, Piano Man. That was the first time that I think back to when I was young, that I listened to a piece of music and could see something. I could see the story. I could see the bar. I could see everything that was going on. And it was the first time I'd heard music that really, it did something to my mind. And so that's a song that will always live with me.
And what would you pick as your film?
And my film, well, as you see, I've got all these comic book kind of things behind me, all my toys that we joked about a bit at the beginning of the podcast, part of my midlife crisis. But Superman, the movie, Christopher Reeve, was a hugely impactful and important film to my life.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And Dom, thank you for co-hosting this with me. Look forward to making many more. And yes, we'd love to come over and speak with you another time, Martin. So thank you very much. And we will create a page for this on the QR Poet website. And we will look forward to catching up with you in the future. Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.